March 17, 1943. Hans-Werner Lerche's hand trembled as he gripped the control yoke of the captured Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress at Rechlin Experimental Airfield. What he was about to discover would shatter every assumption the Luftwaffe held about their enemy. Through the cockpit window, he studied an instrument panel that contradicted 3 years of German intelligence assessments. The Americans cannot possibly have built thousands of these machines, he thought. No nation could manufacture such complexity on an industrial scale while fighting a global war. But the evidence sat before him, waiting to prove him catastrophically wrong. The journey of this particular fortress, coded DL+XXC by German forces and nicknamed Wulf Hound by its American crew, had begun 3 months earlier on a cold December morning. Lieutenant Paul Flickinger piloted serial number 41 to 24,585 during what should have been a routine bombing run against the Rouen-Sotteville Railroad marshalling yards in occupied France. His aircraft was part of the 303rd Bombardment Group, known as Hell's Angels, stationed at RAF Molesworth in England. The group was still green, having received their baptism of fire barely a month earlier. On December 12, 1942, they furnished 20 B-17s for a mission targeting Luftwaffe servicing facilities some 60 miles east of Paris. The mission started routinely enough, but German fighters had other plans. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s tore into the American formation with aggressive persistence. Machine gun and cannon fire ripped through Wulf Hound's fuselage and wings. One engine sputtered and died, its propeller windmilling uselessly. Another began losing power, trailing smoke from damaged cylinders. Flickinger faced an impossible choice as his crippled bomber fell behind the protective formation. The other B-17s continued toward England, unable to slow down without making themselves vulnerable to the swarming German fighters. Attempting to reach England across the Channel meant certain death for a damaged bomber unable to maintain formation. Heading for neutral Switzerland or Sweden involved hundreds of miles over hostile territory with failing engines and pursuing fighters. The only option that offered his crew any chance of survival was an immediate emergency landing on enemy-controlled soil. Scanning the landscape below through breaks in the clouds and smoke from his damaged engines, Flickinger spotted what appeared to be a suitable field near Melun, France, approximately 60 miles southeast of Paris. With remarkable skill, considering his aircraft's damage, he brought the massive 30-ton bomber down for a wheels-up landing in a hayfield. The B-17 slid across the grass and mud, its ball turret guns pointing downward, plowing a long furrow before coming to rest. The 10-man crew emerged with hands raised, expecting to become prisoners of war. What they didn't expect was how valuable their intact aircraft would become to German intelligence. Within hours, Luftwaffe ground crews and Wehrmacht soldiers swarmed over the captured fortress, recognizing immediately that this was not just another crashed bomber to be stripped for scrap metal. This was the first B-17 flying fortress to fall into Luftwaffe hands in flyable condition, an unprecedented opportunity to study American heavy bomber technology. The transportation of Wulf Hound from that French hayfield to the heart of Nazi Germany's aviation testing complex reads like a spy thriller, except every word is true. German recovery specialists worked with frantic urgency, understanding they held an intelligence windfall beyond anything previously captured. Most downed Allied aircraft arrived in pieces, scattered across fields and forests, their secrets buried in twisted metal and broken components. But Wulf Hound sat nearly intact, a complete example of American heavy bomber technology ready for exploitation. German technicians worked quickly to transport the damaged but repairable bomber to Leeuwarden Airfield in the Netherlands, a major Luftwaffe base developed from a pre-war Dutch civil airport. 2 days after capture, on December 14, 1942, German mechanics completed temporary repairs to the battle damage. Fuel tanks were topped off with German aviation gasoline. Then came the transformation that marked Wulf Hound's shift from enemy weapon to intelligence gold mine. German national insignia replaced American markings on the wings and fuselage. Large black crosses adorned the wings. A swastika marked the tail, and the distinctive hellish red and black colors of Nazi Germany announced the bomber's new ownership. Two Messerschmitt Bf-110 heavy fighters took position as escorts, and a hand-picked German crew climbed aboard for the ferry flight to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier testing and evaluation center located approximately 50 miles north of Berlin. The flight plan was distributed to every Luftwaffe fighter base and flak battery along the route with explicit instructions: do not engage the captured fortress. But despite these precautions and the clear German markings, chaos erupted. Some Luftwaffe forces fired on their own captured prize, inflicting minor additional damage before recognition signals could be confirmed and the attackers called off. The incident highlighted both the German eagerness to destroy American bombers on sight and the difficulty of coordinating operations across fractured command structures in a military organization beginning to feel the strain of fighting on multiple fronts. When Wulf Hound touched down at Rechlin after its circuitous flight from the Netherlands, it entered a world dedicated to understanding enemy technology. Rechlin served as the German equivalent to the United States Wright Field in Ohio or the British Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. Every captured Allied airplane that could be repaired to flying condition eventually made its way to this secretive base. Here, German engineers dissected foreign technology, searching for weaknesses to exploit and innovations to copy or counter. The facility employed hundreds of technicians, engineers, test pilots, and support personnel dedicated to the single mission of understanding how enemy aircraft worked and how to defeat them. For 3 months following its arrival in mid-December 1942, Wulf Hound remained grounded, while teams of specialists conducted exhaustive examination that would reveal truths more devastating to German confidence than any battlefield defeat. What German engineers discovered inside Wulf Hound's aluminum skin would haunt Luftwaffe tactical planners for the remainder of the war. The numbers alone were sobering to anyone who understood the implications. The B-17 F model carried 9 Browning M2 machine guns of 50 caliber, positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire across nearly every approach angle a fighter might use. Later models, particularly the B-17G that would enter service in summer and fall 1943, would increase this to 13 guns through the addition of a chin turret and improved nose armament. But even 9 heavy machine guns represented firepower exceeding anything German bomber designs incorporated for defensive purposes. Consider what this meant in practical terms. Each 50 caliber machine gun could fire 750 rounds per minute, creating a stream of projectiles capable of penetrating armor plate, destroying engines, shattering canopies, and killing pilots from ranges exceeding 600 yards. The 50 BMG cartridge fired by these weapons delivered 3 times the kinetic energy of German 792 rounds and comparable energy to German 13 heavy machine guns. When German test pilots calculated the combined firepower of a single B-17 firing all guns simultaneously, the numbers proved staggering. 9 guns at 750 rounds per minute each produced a combined rate of fire approaching 7,000 rounds per minute. Translated to rounds per second, to better understand the immediate tactical effect, a fully engaged fortress could throw approximately 120 heavy machine gun bullets into the surrounding airspace every second. But American bombers never flew alone over enemy territory, and this is where the defensive firepower became truly terrifying. The entire concept of American daylight strategic bombing relied on massed formations where multiple bombers provided mutual defensive fire that dramatically increased the firepower any single attacking fighter would face. The combat box formation, developed by Colonel Curtis LeMay and refined through bloody experience, positioned bombers in tight three-dimensional arrays where each aircraft's guns could support its neighbors. A typical three-squadron group box contained 18 to 27 aircraft, depending on attrition and maintenance status. If each bomber carried even 9 guns, the group's combined defensive armament exceeded 180 heavy machine guns, providing interlocking fire. German fighter pilots attacking such formations described approaching a wall of tracers, a vivid description that captured the visual and psychological impact of mass defensive fire. At typical combat ranges of 400 to 800 yards, every bomber gunner who detected an attacking fighter opened fire simultaneously. 50 or more machine guns might concentrate fire on a single fighter, making a head-on pass through the formation, with each bomber's gunners tracking the target and firing at maximum rate. The psychological impact overwhelmed many pilots regardless of actual hit probability. Luftwaffe After Action reports documented numerous instances of fighters breaking off attacks prematurely before reaching optimal firing range because pilots couldn't force themselves to fly deeper into the defensive barrage. Hans-Werner Lerche approached the challenge of flying Wulf Hound with the methodical precision of an engineer, which he was, combined with the instincts of a natural pilot, which he'd proven himself to be through years of glider flying and powered aircraft experience. But nothing in his extensive background prepared him for what German test pilots would discover about attacking the flying fortress. The tactical reality was brutal and unforgiving. Attacking from directly behind, the traditional German approach to bomber interception that had worked well against earlier Allied bombers with limited defensive armament, exposed the fighter pilot to the most concentrated defensive fire the B-17 could deliver. The tail gunner position, enclosed in a powered Cheyenne turret with excellent visibility through clear plexiglass panels, commanded a clear field of fire directly aft with no blind spots above, below, or to either side within 30 degrees of the tail axis. The dorsal turret, a Sperry design mounting 50 caliber guns in a powered rotating turret, could swing rearward to add its firepower to the defensive barrage, doubling the number of guns engaging a rear attacker. Even the waist gunners, standing at open windows along the fuselage midsection, could engage targets approaching from behind and slightly below or to the sides. A fighter pilot boring in from 6 o'clock, directly behind the bomber, faced at least 4 heavy machine guns concentrating fire along a predictable intercept path. The closing speed between attacking fighter and fleeing bomber, typically around 150 to 200 mph differential, gave the German pilot perhaps 3 to 5 seconds of firing time before breaking away to avoid collision with the massive bomber. During those few seconds, the bomber's gunners poured hundreds of rounds into the approach corridor, creating a cone of fire that the fighter had to penetrate. Luftwaffe combat reports documented the deadly effectiveness of this defensive arrangement, with numerous fighters damaged or destroyed during tail attacks. Attacking from below presented different challenges, but no better prospects. The belly turret, called the Sperry ball turret by Americans, provided complete coverage of the lower hemisphere with no blind spots. This remarkable piece of engineering positioned a gunner in a rotating sphere equipped with 50 caliber machine guns and a computing gun sight that helped calculate the lead angle needed to hit fast-moving targets. The ball turret gunner, crouched in impossibly cramped quarters with knees drawn up to his chest and oxygen mask pressed against the optical sight, could track targets through 360 degrees of azimuth and nearly 90 degrees of elevation. The physical demands were severe, but the defensive capability was unmatched. German pilots quickly learned through bitter experience that attacking from beneath a B-17 formation meant exposing themselves to concentrated fire from multiple ball turrets, each one tracking their approach with mechanical precision. The tactic that emerged from Rechlin's test program as offering the best chance of success involved frontal attacks, and it required nerves of absolute steel. Approaching the bomber head-on from 12 o'clock high, diving slightly from above and ahead, offered German pilots their best hope of survival and success. This approach minimized exposure time to defensive fire and targeted the bomber's weakest defensive zone where fewer guns could be brought to bear. Early B-17 models, including the F variant that Wulf Hound represented, mounted only 2 or 3 flexible guns in the nose, operated by the bombardier and navigator, who had other primary duties during combat and weren't dedicated gunners. This frontal attack doctrine was pioneered by Hauptmann Egon Mayer of Jagdgeschwader II in late 1942, shortly before Wulf Hound was captured. Mayer recognized through combat experience and tactical analysis that most B-17 defensive firepower faced rearward or to the sides, leaving the nose relatively vulnerable. Attacking from directly ahead meant the fighter's relative closing speed exceeded 500 mph, with the fighter approaching at 350 to 400 mph and the bomber flying toward it at 150 to 180 mph. This combined closure rate gave the bomber's nose gunner perhaps 2 seconds to aim and fire before the fighter flashed past overhead or underneath. But here's what made this tactic so terrifying to execute. Fighter and bomber hurtled toward each other at combined speeds exceeding 500 mph, closing the distance between them at nearly 750 feet per second. The attacking pilot needed to hold his course directly into the bomber's nose, watching it grow from a distant speck to a massive 4-engine aircraft filling his windscreen, waiting until the range closed to point-blank distance of 200 yards or less before firing his cannons and machine guns. Any hesitation, any early breakaway prompted by survival instinct, reduced effectiveness dramatically by wasting the limited ammunition carried by German fighters. The psychological pressure of watching a 4-engine bomber grow larger in the windscreen, while tracer fire from the nose guns flashed past, the canopy proved too much for many pilots. They broke off too early, wasting their attack and exposing themselves to fire from the top turret as they passed overhead. Even successful frontal attacks often proved fatal for the German pilot despite destroying the bomber. The combined closing speed meant collision remained a constant danger that required precise timing and spatial judgment. Multiple Luftwaffe fighters collided with B-17s during frontal passes, killing both crews instantly in the violent impact. Those pilots who mastered the head-on pass achieved impressive kill ratios, sometimes downing multiple bombers in a single mission. But the cost in pilot lives and the nerve required meant this tactic couldn't be universally applied across all Luftwaffe fighter units. While German test pilots marveled at the B-17's defensive firepower, German engineers studying Wulf Hound's construction discovered something that should have terrified every strategist in the Third Reich. The bomber demonstrated mass production techniques on a scale German industry had never achieved or even seriously attempted. Standardized components meant parts manufactured at different factories would fit together without custom fitting. Interchangeable parts allowed damaged components to be swapped quickly in field conditions. Simplified assembly sequences reduced the skill level required for workers, allowing semi-skilled labor to build complex aircraft. Everything about the bomber's design indicated an industrial philosophy fundamentally different from German practice. Where German aircraft required skilled craftsmen to hand-fit complex components through labor-intensive processes, American bombers used standardized modules that semi-skilled workers could install rapidly using jigs, templates, and fixtures. German engineers removed panels to study structural design, marveling at the sophisticated stressed skin construction that gave the B-17 its legendary toughness. They measured skin thickness, analyzed alloy composition, tested rivet patterns, and joining techniques. Every system received detailed documentation. The electrical network, with its miles of wiring, revealed American approaches to aircraft systems integration. The hydraulic controls showed sophisticated valve designs and pressure regulation. The implications were staggering for German planners who understood industrial capacity. If one captured bomber showed this level of manufacturing sophistication, suggesting an industrial system optimized for volume production, how many could American industry produce in a month? In a year, the numbers, when German intelligence analysts ran the calculations, suggested production rates that seemed impossible yet proved conservative. German reports from these studies expressed grudging admiration for American industrial organization, while noting the impossibility of Germany matching such methods. The B-17 represented more than individual engineering excellence or clever design solutions. It represented a complete manufacturing philosophy, prioritizing production volume over artisanal quality, emphasizing interchangeable parts over custom fitting, and accepting adequate quality over perfection. Every design decision reflected this philosophy of mass production. Standardized fasteners throughout the aircraft reduced inventory requirements and simplified assembly. Straight panels with minimal compound curves simplified forming operations and reduced scrap rates. Modular subassemblies allowed parallel construction of fuselage sections, wings, and tail surfaces that came together in final assembly with minimal fitting required, dramatically reducing production time. This approach enabled Boeing's Seattle plant to complete one B-17 every hour at peak production rates, a feat that seemed impossible to German observers accustomed to production rates measured in weeks per aircraft. German factories, still using traditional aircraft construction methods with custom-fitted components and skilled craftsmen performing most operations, required weeks to build a single bomber. The production statistics remain staggering even 8 decades after the war's end, and they tell a story of industrial dominance that no amount of German tactical brilliance could overcome. Boeing, Douglas, and Vega produced 12,731 B-17s during the war. Let that number sink in for a moment. 12,731 heavy bombers, each one a complex machine containing approximately 40,000 individual parts manufactured by hundreds of subcontractors. Boeing's Seattle plant alone built 6981 B-17s across all variants. Douglas contributed 3,000 from plants in Long Beach between 1942 and 1945. Vega added 2750 from Burbank. Peak production in 1944 saw Boeing alone building approximately 362 B-17 bombers per month, more than 12 per day from a single manufacturing facility. Germany never built even 2,000 four-engine bombers during the entire war, despite starting with a more advanced aviation industry in the 1930s and having pioneered strategic bombing concepts. The Heinkel He 177, Germany's only operational four-engine heavy bomber and the result of years of development, suffered from chronic engine fires due to its unusual coupled engine design and mechanical problems that limited operational availability. Total production across all variants barely exceeded 1,100 aircraft between 1942 and 1944, and operational availability remained so poor that many units refused to accept the type, preferring twin-engine medium bombers despite their inferior range and bomb load. When Luftwaffe pilots learned these production statistics through intelligence briefings that attempted to prepare them for the scale of opposition they would face, morale suffered accordingly among thoughtful pilots who understood the implications. What was the point of risking their lives to shoot down one fortress when 10 more would replace it within a week? The question haunted fighter squadrons across Germany as the strategic situation deteriorated through 1944. Even if German fighters achieved favorable loss ratios in combat, even if they shot down 2 or 3 bombers for every fighter lost, American industry could sustain such attrition indefinitely while German industry could not. The reasons for this dramatic production disparity extended far beyond simple industrial capacity or factory floor space. American geography protected by vast oceans that enemy forces couldn't cross, allowed undisturbed factory expansion and operation, while German industry operated under constant Allied bombing that destroyed facilities, killed workers, and disrupted supply chains. American engineering education produced thousands of skilled designers, managers, and technicians annually, while Germany struggled with manpower shortages as the war dragged on and casualties mounted. Most fundamentally, American political and economic systems proved more adaptable to total war mobilization than the rigid Nazi hierarchy, with its competing power centers, inefficient decision-making, and ideological constraints. After its appearance at an exhibition at Lechfeld Airfield in June 1943, where Luftwaffe officers could examine Wulf Hound alongside other captured Allied aircraft, the bomber transferred to operational service with one of the most secretive units in the German military. Kampfgeschwader 200 operated from Rangsdorf Airfield near Berlin as a special operations wing unlike any other in the German Air Force. KG-200's mission portfolio included long-range reconnaissance, flights deep into enemy territory using aircraft that could blend with enemy formations, insertion and extraction of intelligence agents behind Allied lines, supply drops to German forces operating in partisan-controlled areas or cut off by enemy advances, and testing of experimental aircraft and weapons too sensitive for standard evaluation units. The B-17's long range exceeding 2,000 miles, high-altitude capability above 25,000 feet, and rugged construction that could survive damage and harsh conditions made it ideal for many of the unit's missions. Flying captured American bombers deep into Allied-controlled territory offered unique advantages that justified the logistical burden of maintaining non-standard aircraft. At night or in poor visibility conditions, Allied radar operators and fighter controllers might mistake the German crewed fortress for a friendly bomber returning from a mission over Europe, allowing the intruder to penetrate Allied airspace undetected or unchallenged. The deception could buy precious minutes or even hours before defenses reacted, time that could mean the difference between mission success and failure. At Rangsdorf, Wulf Hound received a new paint scheme designed for night operations over Allied territory. Dark camouflage colors in blues and grays replaced the earlier test aircraft schemes. KG-200 side codes, beginning with A3+, were applied to both sides of the fuselage, identifying the aircraft to German forces while maintaining some operational security about its specific unit assignment. Records indicate the bomber was eventually coded A3+I, though some sources suggest it may have carried multiple codes during its service, depending on mission requirements. Detailed documentation of Wulf Hound's operational service with KG-200 has been lost to history, scattered across archives that were destroyed or dispersed, concealed by participants who survived into the post-war era when certain operations remained classified for decades, or simply never created due to the secretive nature of special operations work. However, post-war research by aviation historians established that KG-200 operated at least 4 captured B-17s between late 1943 and mid-1944. These bombers flew missions across Europe, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and North Africa, operating in some of the war's most sensitive theaters. Some missions involved straightforward transport of critical personnel or equipment to isolated German garrisons. Others inserted intelligence agents into Allied-controlled territory using parachute drops at night. Several missions conducted reconnaissance of Allied installations, photographing ports where invasion forces might assemble. The most sensitive operations remain shrouded in secrecy decades after the war's conclusion. By late 1943, the Americans continuously improved their bombers based on combat experience and crew feedback, and what they developed would make even the head-on attack far more dangerous. The B-17G model entering service in late summer and fall 1943 added the distinctive chin turret under the nose, a remotely operated turret mounting two 50 caliber machine guns that could engage targets directly ahead. This remotely operated turret was controlled by the bombardier through a computing gun sight, significantly improving the bomber's frontal defensive capability against the head-on attacks that had proved so effective against earlier models. Suddenly, the head-on attack that had been the preferred tactic of German aces became far more dangerous for attacking pilots. The chin turret could track an attacking fighter throughout its approach from first detection at long range, concentrating fire along the predicted intercept path. Combined with the existing cheek guns operated by the bombardier and navigator, plus the top turret, which could swing forward to add its two guns to the defensive barrage, a B-17G could bring 6 to 8 heavy machine guns to bear on a frontal attacker, creating a defensive cone that required exceptional skill to penetrate. Luftwaffe studies conducted using data from actual combat engagements determined that rear attacks on B-17s required an average of 20 hits from 20 cannon shells to destroy a bomber, and that figure-assumed hits were distributed across vulnerable systems rather than concentrated in one area. The B-17's rugged construction, redundant systems, and self-sealing fuel tanks allowed it to absorb tremendous punishment and continue flying. Average pilot accuracy against evasive targets at combat ranges ran approximately 2%, a figure determined through analysis of gun camera footage and ammunition expenditure reports. Therefore, bringing down a single fortress from behind required firing approximately 1,000 rounds of 20 ammunition to achieve the 20 hits needed for a kill. Early model Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters carried only 500 rounds total of 20 ammunition distributed across two cannons, with each gun holding 250 rounds in drum magazines. Even with upgraded armament, a German fighter pilot might have ammunition for one, perhaps two sustained gun runs before running Winchester and being forced to break off and return to base for rearming. Meanwhile, the bombers continued firing as long as they detected threats, their thousands of rounds of 50 caliber ammunition allowing prolonged defensive engagement throughout the mission. While individual bomber gunners achieved relatively low hit percentages due to difficult deflection shooting at extreme ranges and high closure speeds, the sheer volume of fire made hits statistically inevitable when dozens of bombers engaged a single target. Luftwaffe fighter losses climbed steadily through 1943 as American bomber streams grew larger and more frequent, while German fighter forces struggled to regenerate losses faster than combat attrition destroyed them. By 1945, when Wulf Hound met its end during an American bombing raid on Oranienburg airfield on April 10, the strategic bombing campaign had achieved its primary objectives, and the captured bomber that had taught the Luftwaffe so much had become a symbol of the futility of fighting against overwhelming material advantage. German industry lay in ruins across the Ruhr Valley and other industrial centers. Fuel shortages grounded much of the Luftwaffe despite having aircraft available. Transportation chaos prevented delivery of critical supplies to front lines where German armies faced defeat. The fortresses had completed their mission despite heavy losses along the way. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most successful fighter aces, with 104 confirmed victories and eventual commander of German fighter forces, wrote extensively in post-war years about the challenges of defending against American daylight bombing. He acknowledged that individual German pilots often possessed superior training and more extensive combat experience compared to American bomber crews, many of whom were on their first combat tour. German fighters, particularly late-war models like the Focke-Wulf FW-190D9 long-nose variant and Messerschmitt Bf-109K4, could outperform B-17s in every performance metric, including speed, climb rate, and maneuverability. German cannons hit far harder than American. 50 caliber machine guns, delivering explosive shells that could destroy bombers with a few hits. Yet despite these advantages in equipment and pilot skill, German fighters couldn't stop the daylight bombing campaign that systematically destroyed German industrial capacity. Galland attributed this failure to multiple factors in his post-war writings and interviews, but American industrial capacity topped his list of decisive factors. The Americans simply built more of everything faster than Germany could destroy it, whether bombers, fighters, tanks, or any other war material. The captured B-17s proved this reality beyond any doubt for German engineers and planners who studied them. Hans-Werner Lerche flew numerous captured aircraft during his tenure at Rechlin and other test facilities, accumulating over 125 different aircraft types from various nations without a single serious accident. His post-war writing reflected professional respect for Allied aviation technology, tempered by frustration at German industry's inability to match Allied production rates and organizational efficiency. He flew B-17s, B-24 Liberators, British Lancasters, Soviet P-2s, and numerous fighter types from all combatant nations. But the B-17 remained the most strategically significant aircraft he evaluated, because it represented American strategic bombing doctrine made manifest in aluminum and steel. Every aspect of the fortress's design supported its mission to penetrate deep into enemy territory, deliver heavy bomb loads with precision, and return home despite determined opposition. The defensive armament that so impressed German evaluators served as the critical enabler for this mission profile, but it was the industrial capacity behind those guns that proved ultimately decisive. That was the real lesson of the captured flying fortresses. The bombers came every day in increasing numbers, the fighter escorts grew more numerous and capable, the targets burned systematically, and there was nothing the Luftwaffe could do to stop the campaign despite heroic individual efforts.